I have prepared an online course, a 10 module online course on evangelism, and with the hope that we might reimagine and what evangelism is all about. One of the questions that the Christian faith has always claimed to answer is, what is the nature and the purpose of life? Particularly once one is saved. We are created to be in an eternal relationship with God. We have been torn apart from that relationship and therefore from our own purpose by our sin. And it is God's intention that reconciliation takes place, so that we are saved to help save others. While this explanation is valid as far as it goes, it has its limits. It is oriented, as much as we consider evangelical circles, toward the point of conversion, as though conversion is it. It explains why people have a need for God and what that need has to do with the question of purpose. It explains, in other words, why people should come to God in the first place, but not really what should happen after they have come to God. This, of course, is not a mere academic question. It's a common experience for people to come to Jesus, perhaps even with a radical conversion experience. They have an initial period of excitement, of fulfillment, and wonder at this newfound life. Only at some points later, they cool off. The typical answer to that question is, get involved in evangelism. It is often, sometimes stated, even straight out from the pulpit. The only reason you continue to live on planet Earth after you've gotten saved is so that you can help other people get to heaven. So, is that what it's all about? I would suggest that if that is what Christianity or the Christian life is all about, there should have been a lot of evidence in the scriptures to show the model of evangelism. Oddly enough, that's not what we find. As detailed in the book of Acts, which is where one would expect to find some strong positive evidence of personal evangelism, that's not what we find. So I want to deal with that. Rather than those believers simply representing in Christians in general, Acts seems to give a distinct impression that each one is equally called to accomplish the work that he is to accomplish. We would think that's the way it was supposed to be. But Acts of the Apostles, it may be argued, is simply about specific missionary efforts. It leaves the role of personal evangelism out. And that may indeed be the case. But one would also expect to read a lot about personal evangelism in the epistles. In fact, they don't. Most of the epistles are divided into a largely doctrinal section and a largely practical section. In the book of Romans, for example, the first 11 chapters are primarily doctrinal, while chapters 12 through 15 are largely practical. The section of the epistles that are more practical in nature are called the paranetic sections of the epistles. And this is where we would expect to find some reference to personal evangelism, but it's not. In Romans, for example, chapter 12 deals with general Christian character, including encouragement to serve faithfully in one's gifts. Verse 11 warns against lacking in zeal, but applies this imperative to serving the Lord, not to sharing one's faith. Verses 17 through 21 involve the believer's relationship with everyone, not evangelism. Chapter 13 involves one's relationship with governing authorities, living in love and living in purity because of the impending salvation. Romans 14 deals with different believers having different convictions regarding disputable matters. Romans 15 concludes this discussion, exhorting believers to bear one another, after which Paul begins describing the role of God's minister to the Gentiles. So let's try another book, the book of Ephesians. Ephesians is split pretty evenly in half. Chapters 1 to 3 are doctrinal in nature. Chapters 4 through 6 are practical in nature. So in each case, through the book of Ephesians, through the other epistles, Paul balances the expected counsel of evangelism with a relationship between individuals. So there's a great deal of exhortation for believers to exhibit, however, the kind of character and lifestyle that is worthy of emulation, reflect well on Jesus and the gospel, promote loving and peaceful relationships both within and outside the fellowship of believers, and encourage one another's own spiritual growth. So that trivangelism, I want to say, is not a model, but is a movement, a movement that I'm trying to say that we need to approach evangelism a little differently. All that I've talked about probably points to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because they reveal post-resurrection, revealed how those who actually lived for Jesus behaved. One can see that in some way, this is what Jesus did. At first, he simply preaches the message of the kingdom, exemplified the Sermon on the Mount, which itself focuses on character and ethics. Later, he chooses among the crowds that were following him a dozen guys and particular individuals to be trained. And then he sent out 2 by 2 to do the same thing in Matthew 10. Later, he sent out the 70 to do the same thing. The evangelical church would argue that the ongoing mission to reach the lost is simply an extension of that progression. I seem to think that the emphasis of evangelism ought to be on the lifestyle that Jesus exemplified. What Jesus said about eating his flesh and drinking his blood appeared merely bizarre among those who heard it for the first time. But examining the way Jesus performed miracles, we can see that he often performed the same miracle in different ways. He seems to be making a point, and the point is this: do not follow my methodology, but follow me. So to sum up, the evangelical church asserts a biblical mandate for all believers to be involved in some sort of evangelism or outreach to those who do not yet believe. But when we search the scriptures, we find little evidence to support this mandate. Jesus' ministry, as recorded in Acts, as recorded in the Gospels rather, at least in some unique sense, and in Acts also, demonstrate how the directive to make disciples was the focus of evangelism. Acts shows us not every believer reaching out to all of his friends and neighbors, but rather living out the implications of that gospel in their practical love and care for one another. And a number of specially gifted individuals were charged with explicit responsibility to evangelize. I'm sure that there are some who would disagree with me and with respect to trivangelism and the emphasis that I have chosen to take. Why would some professing faith in Jesus argue so stridently against it? Well, it's simply that I think that evangelism, as we know it, is a failing enterprise. It is simply trivangelism to suggest that God may not have designed the gospel to spread in that manner, and may not have designed all of us to be able to function as outgoing evangelists. It may be that the model of how evangelism is supposed to work is deficient, that we might be able to view it in a different light, and that viewing it in a different light might encourage rather than discourage more believers' participation in the larger advancement of the kingdom that will result in the salvation of those who do not believe at this particular point. The typical model of how evangelism is supposed to work divides people into saved and lost. And this is the way we have done it. When we die, what exactly happens? But I think that model is deficient in this sense. We disregard the different places that people are in their present experience with spirituality or with God, not necessarily with a conversion experience. That's the answer. That is, individual people living out their individual purposes dictated by individual gifts, all work together, not only to bring as many people as possible to Christ, but to help them to become as much like Christ as possible, so that we join them on a journey, irrespective of where they are on that journey. So the crisis experience ought not to be the dominant modality. We must learn to appreciate the different parts of the journey that different individuals have. So it is not in or out, it is not the lost or the saved, but it's to appreciate individuals irrespective of where they are on their journey. Maybe you effectively deliver the gospel to those who have been so prepared. Maybe you take people who already know the gospel and bring them to the next level of maturity and obedience. As Paul said, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been able to make it grow. 1 Corinthians 3:6. That's the answer to evangelism. In Christ, you get to be yourself, only better. You get to be the you that you could never be. Maybe the you that you can never envision. You get to be the best you imaginable. But it's you, not the prefab cookie cutout that some claim to be evangelism, however well intentioned that may be. It's the you that your Creator thought you should be, actually created you to be, and that you find yourself in a world where the commission of Jesus to make disciples is not a one-size-fits-all, but that as individuals in the kingdom, we seek out persons who we can join on their journey, seeking a sense of fulfillment. And so that I hope that you would get a copy of this online course, Trivangelism, Reimagining the E-Word. You may not agree with everything that is said there, but at least we take a stab at it and we look at evangelism through different lenses, and maybe, just maybe, persons on the outside, pre-Christians, may view Christ differently as Christ is lived out in your life. Go to my website, www.thediaconia.com, and the online course is there. It's only $19.95. It's just about 6 hours. And it is self-paced, and I think that your life will be changed by taking a look at least at Trivangelism, Reimagining the E-Word. God bless you.